Right, I'd now like to invite you, Rosalyn and Sandrine. I know you've been working in feverishly on an agile sourcing program, so it'd be really great to get your insights on, the do's and the don'ts, the obstacles, the challenges, the benefits that you've seen on your journeys. So over to both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. So good morning, everybody. When we were approached to have a conversation about agile sourcing in this webinar, there absolutely, my belief is there is a growing interest in agile sourcing methodologies across sourcing and procurement. One of the questions that I've had about this and having implemented agile sourcing and working with clients in attempting to implement this has been, are the buying organizations and or the providers ready to successfully implement agile sourcing? We can go further down to the left to say, do people understand what it is? But once they do understand it, do they have the capacity and the capability? And what are the challenges in actually implementing agile sourcing? So I thought it would be really useful to bring the whole topic to life with a client who is actively looking to understand and implement the principles of agile sourcing. And I would be surprised probably if many people on this webinar would disagree that technology sourcing has probably been the leading category adopting or trying to adopt agile sourcing. And also, I guess, there is a familiarity with agile with a capital A. You have a semi-aware customer base potentially, and some service providers who have some knowledge or capability or appetite to implement some of those methodologies. But really, if this is going to punch out as a modern way of sourcing, which I quite like that terminology, it will become most effective when it can be implemented into a full procurement function or a supply function when it spreads across more categories. Now, the interesting thing about Galapagos, and I will hand over to Sandrine to talk more about what Galapagos do and why this is an interesting approach for them, is it's a biotech. So by its very nature, it has some tech based in there, but how do we bring their focus really is about bringing innovation. It's research, it's development, it's innovation. And when Sandrine and Galapagos first approached myself and Sorcery to help with this started off as a concept of thinking about introducing an innovation category. So we have technology categories, we have the usual logistics, professional services, everything. But this idea of bringing in an innovation category. Now, bringing innovation categories in means that by its very nature, people are looking to do more significant partnering with providers in business and product development. So, I'm sure you can see that there are obviously some very clear synergies then with agile sourcing as a principle. So, whilst the initial brief with Galapagos was really to help support and work out how to develop an innovation category, it very rapidly moved and evolved into a discussion about, if you're going to have an innovation category, if you're working with providers to provide innovation to you, then you need providers and a client, internal client, who have a joint vested interest in an outcome. Very probably the end outcome is actually unknown. It could be joint commercial interests. There's very much a long-term relationship requirement. So we started to talk about why agile sourcing and agile contracting may be something that is actually the way that Galapagos could start to solve the problem of having an innovation category and having suppliers within that category. So we kicked off, I think, sort of late last year, Sandrine, and we were appointed, Sorcery were appointed to conduct the advisory work with Galapagos. Sandrine is absolutely on the hook to deliver the innovation category and to introduce the concept of agile sourcing and contracting into Galapagos. And we're developing and supporting that concept. And we have had multiple conversations about the definition of agile, and we're hoping that we'll go through what does agile sourcing mean? What does it mean for Galapagos, so that you can understand that thought process. We'll go through some of the real life challenges in the introduction of agile sourcing methodologies and talk about a real life happening at Galapagos now for you. So, Sandrine, can I just hand over to you to talk a little bit about Galapagos, the structure of your procurement, and the type of.
Sure, Rosalyn. I think your network was a bit breaking down, but I will take over. I hope you all hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Yeah,
yeah.
Rosalyn, you might need to hang up and come back in though, because we have definitely lost you. But
That was a great time to lose me, wasn't it?
It happened. Oh, you're back now.
I do apologise, people. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Sandrine to talk about the Galapagos requirements.
Yeah,
Excellent.
so
Thank you.
I will start with the background to Galapagos. At Galapagos, in our procurement value proposition, customer-centric is key. And so we have built a close relationship with our business. The category directors have the business partner role as well, which is really important at Galapagos. It's to build close relationship with the business and the suppliers. So that's really key for agile sourcing, you'll see. So since, as Rosalyn says, since September 2022, I've started a new role where procurement drive innovation. And so I had to build this type of role from scratch. It's not a real category because it can touch any category. And so that's why we were consulting with Rosalyn to see how we can build this innovation-led, like procurement-led innovation role. So Rosalyn and myself, we were starting to work and together, and as she explained, she started guiding me on my agile sourcing journey, which takes some time, a lot of discussion, a lot of thoughts has happened. We haven't implemented yet, but we close to something. So I think during our discussion, we'll get back to that. I will be super frank with you. Rosalyn, when I talked to her, she was starting to be really excited about agile sourcing, saying that it works perfectly with innovation and it's a real great combination, agile sourcing and innovation. So from my side, I was getting excited too. And we started talking about this agile approach. But then I was like, oh, wait a minute, please hold on, because I get the principle of agile sourcing, but I just don't know how to implement it. I needed like concrete examples or to understand it well, what does it mean? And so that's how it's really start with Rosalyn when she like explained me all the process. And I think that's the next step, Rosalyn, that you will re-explain about it, because for me, I needed that explanation to understand how I want to implement it within our procurement team.
Yeah, thanks, Sandrine. And I do think we go back to I think Sandrine's absolutely correct. One of the first point was really to a relatively new organisation to the concept of agile sourcing, and Galapagos is a very forward-thinking procurement function in many ways. We did initially encounter the challenges. I was probably being a bit of an evangelist about it. We worked out the synergy, but Sandrine had the challenge of actually then going back and selling that into her senior organisation, and I think it's fair to say that one of the issues that you did encounter was helping your peers and your senior business colleagues to understand what agile sourcing was. Do you want to sort of share a little bit about how their response and the level, I guess, the level of interest or enthusiasm, or where they were struggling with this?
Yeah, so first I tried to discuss it with our procurement folks just on this new approach. And yeah, I didn't find much interest for most of them, and also for my procurement community. Agile means, be more flexible or adaptable, but it's not a new methodology or a new way of doing the sourcing. So that was the first thing the first reaction that I got. And then another thing came up, which was the skill sets within the procurement community. If we want to apply agile sourcing, we need to build all this agile process and way of working, which might take time to set up and to explain it to the whole procurement community. And after thinking about it, we thought that this approach might not be suitable for everyone in the team and also for everything. So we have to make sure that we find the right category or the right project to work on. And because agile sourcing is really immersive and embedded type of approach with the business, the suppliers, and with procurement driving it. So that was really important. So the skill sets was still a question.
Yeah, so I think one of the additional activities that Sandrine and I were working on in parallel with the introduction and the implementation of agile sourcing methodologies was Galapagos's procurement capability framework. And it became rapidly very clear and obvious to us that this wasn't just a program of adopting and implementing an agile sourcing methodology and a framework that we just drop in and expect some of the team to parachute in and deliver agile sourcing where a project perhaps lent itself to that. And we started to actually understand and appreciate that the capability framework for the procurement team needed to be quite extensively expanded and extended. Some work had already gone on in terms of an understanding of modern sourcing and modern procurement functions where the buyer is much more a business partner. So that was well understood, but actually selling the concept of agile into their business areas and then physically delivering an agile sourcing process is very different to a high level statement that agile is going to be the way forward. And Galapagos, I think it's fair to say, Sandrine, had agile with a lowercase a throughout its entire philosophy, with a lot of business functions trying to understand what that meant for their function. I think one of the barriers that we identified quite early on as well was, I think I referenced earlier, we may have some understanding and capability and experience in the IT service provider community, that at the moment, the maturity of extending that across maybe into business services, into research and development is less mature. And one of the things I really want to explore in this webinar and moving forward with GSA is the supplier experience and how much suppliers are driving supporting agile methodologies and working in that agile sourcing ways with their clients. We also came across, I think, a barrier of understanding how much resource was going to be required because it is incredibly immersive, it's incredibly collaborative. If you adopt a purist approach to agile methodology, it can be very immersive, and helping people to understand the benefits of that type of approach and gaining their interest and understanding that they're going to be incredibly focused on this project for a short amount of time. But if they want earlier rewards, earlier returns, and something that they work together with an outcome, is worth investing in that. And I think the final, there are lots of sort of challenges around this, but I because I'm an evangelist about this, I want to think about the ways that we solve these challenges about agile sourcing. It's actually making sure you, and I think David referred to this, it's picking the right types of projects. Mm-hmm. And one of the areas that I think we can talk about now is actually in a lot of organizations, the question is that you have a lot of partnerships already in place with suppliers. This is not always about adopting a new requirement with a new supplier. Sometimes you have existing frameworks in place, but there may be new projects that are required under those. So we had quite a big debate about, are we trying to implement agile sourcing, or are we with a competitive agile sourcing process with new competitors into the market, or a fully competitive process, or actually are we adopting agile requirements and solution development methodologies and commercial methodologies with an existing partner for new projects within that? And we recognize that actually they're very two different approaches. They obviously have commonality, but looking to find those projects that could be a proof of value or a proof of concept for Galapagos really became the focus of our work. And ultimately realizing that the best way to approach this, to introduce the concept, was to take an existing partner, an existing framework, and start to introduce the principles of agile contracting and agile relationship, as opposed to a whole cradle to grave new agile sourcing process. Sandrine, how do you think you found that so far? I know we haven't landed it quite yet, but do you want to talk a little bit about how you started to identify that project and where we are with it, basically?
Yeah, so yeah, because one of the challenge as well for agile sourcing is to find the right business, like the right partner from the business side, because usually the internal stakeholders, they don't understand what we want really with the agile sourcing, and we need high engagement and commitment from the business as well as from the suppliers. So I one day I was like working on a project for on data sciences and AI, and we did a traditional sourcing approach, but the vendor was so into the discussion for the collaboration, and even the business was in that discussion for the negotiation. We end up expressing the final objective of the service, agreeing on only on the outcomes, and then we were moving forward on workshops with the vendors to create the design for the project, and have the payment based on success of the objective, for instance. And so I was like, oh, this is a good project where I can call Rosalyn and talk about it with her to see how we can move forward with more an agile approach with that vendor. So that was my first thought, and Rosalyn was explaining to me, oh, but your sourcing has been done, so we don't call that agile sourcing anymore because you find the vendor. But we wanted to move forward with a more immersive and collaborative work with the vendor. And so we were discussing about the contracting that hasn't been happened yet. And she was like, oh, this is the way we can introduce agile by putting in place an agile contracting. And so I was like, yeah, it's really interesting, because for the idea is creating a customer collaboration contracting with the supplier and the business and us procurement all together, to rather than having like a traditional contracting negotiation, right? So we are going to collaborate all together to sign on objectives, to set very clear expectations and outcomes, but the construction of the project will be done collectively between the supplier and the business, and we have to find like the joint vested interest and pricing for the future, but we have to work that together. And I think the agile contracting will really accelerate the relationship all together, like the from the supplier, the business, and procurement. Create like the agile partnership approach and guidance to explain how we will work together. So that's the approach that we have in mind, and that I was thinking to put in place with this vendor and our business.
Yeah, thanks, Sandrine. I think it's been a real journey up to here to really realize that it's a fairly significant program for a procurement department to wholly embrace agile sourcing as a methodology, try to implement it, and frankly, I've heard procurement departments who have said that they're going to adopt this across the board. I think my experience, we have delivered, Sorcery and myself, we have delivered agile sourcing projects. The implementation as a full procurement transformation, I think, is still relatively immature. Doesn't mean to say that it's not going to get there, and it will be a good place to be. But I think at the moment, my experience is that there is a true appetite in some areas for agile sourcing, but in reality, there are lots of ways to skin the cat. And our conclusion on this, and I think we reached the same conclusion with Sandrine, is that you can't be a slave to one single methodology in this. The likelihood is initially that you're going to have to trial some small projects, even elements of a project. It may be we have quite a few models now that are hybrids while people become comfortable with this. It's very reliant on an engaged and capable service provider who wants to work on the same basis. For those that are struggling with the implementation challenge, perhaps an existing relationship is a good place to start and to look to implement this and build capability. And as I say, equally important is an engaged and a knowledgeable and a capable provider. And I am genuinely interested in where service providers are seeing this or looking at this as a differentiator in their own sourcing engagement with customers. But we're quietly comfortable and confident that we have a project now that we can start a proof of value on and to implement that within Galapagos, which is a great place to be sort of 4 or 5 months on from where we started this. So Sandrine, any final thoughts from you on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, maybe just to give my experience. So I think the word agile means different things for different people. Depends on their experience, culture, and habits as well. My journey on agile sourcing is just starting. How I try to describe it to my procurement colleagues or internal partners is an immersive, collaborative way to procure services and goods, working simultaneously with the business and the suppliers. That was really important. And as I'm working in innovation, it's quite easy to find the right business partner because they really seek for innovation as well. They really open-minded to and will commit on the time that they have to spend on that. But I think I'm really lucky to have this innovation part in my job. And what I explained to my business is really that we will work in a collaborative sourcing where we're seeking mutual benefits with the supplier towards a common objective. So that's how I try to describe it to my business. And it's something that I really want to move forward because innovation is like that collaboration, finding better, suitable things that happening for common objectives.
Amazing. Thank you, Sandrine.
Thanks,
Carrie.